Previously, I discussed the two philosophical approaches to organizing society, egalitarian humanism versus hierarchical elitism. Here, I'll discuss a fundamental question about the meaning of life. Are we here to know the world or be happy? Are we here to seek knowledge or happiness? So in this segment, I'll look at a few important philosophers. On the knowledge side, I'll look at the philosophy of Francis Bacon, Martin Heidegger, and Michel Foucault. On the happiness side, I'll look at the philosophy of Erasmus, Michel Montaigne, and Bertrand Russell. As I discussed earlier, philosophy is concerned mainly with two questions. Ontology asks what is out there, and epistemology asks how we know it. So knowledge is fundamental to philosophy. You could say we humans are hardwired to see, understand, analyze, and interpret the world. In other words, we are curious creatures, so the development of modern science is just the byproduct of this curiosity, and our thirst for knowledge drives innovation and social change. But we are also creatures who seek happiness. While knowledge can empower us, it doesn't make us happy. While knowledge can transform our lives, it doesn't guarantee happiness or peace of mind. As I discussed earlier, the first philosopher to methodically seek the truth was Socrates. And later Aristotle improved it by giving the approach a scientific and empirical tinge to it. But it wasn't until centuries later the scientific approach was perfected in Europe, mainly in 15th and 16th centuries through the works of scientists such as Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton. During this period, the English philosopher and scientist and politician Francis Bacon, who lived between 1561 and 1626, looked at knowledge from an empirical point of view. He graduated from Cambridge University and is often considered the first empiricist, a school of philosophy later developed by other British philosophers such as John Locke and David Hume. Bacon placed the source of knowledge in our experience through our senses. At the time, the church held the view that knowledge came from God, and science was challenging that. Church relied on people not knowing and not questioning things. When nobody knows things, the church could control information and become the source of knowledge. Today, you could say that big media companies have the same mindset. But Francis Bacon understood the power of knowledge and wanted to educate everyone because he believed that through knowledge you could empower the poor so they could live better lives. This is an early idea of public education, which today we take for granted. Bacon understood that humans are on the one hand knowledge seekers, but on the other hand humans also have some blind spots like religious belief, tribal affiliations, and love of money, which prevent us from getting to the truth. Another problem we have as humans is that we project our own limited experience to the world. Bacon argued that science, however, doesn't look at an individual, but looks at the majority to generalize. It's through generalization that you get closer to the truth. For instance, if one person experiences something, it's subjective and unreliable. But if, let's say, 10, 20, 100 or more people experience the same thing, then you can generalize and make science out of it. Understanding generality is an immense power, according to Francis Bacon. So knowledge not only opens the knower's mind, it also empowers them to change their lives for the better. Of course, Bacon lived at a time when people had very little, so education and knowledge could transform a person's life immeasurably. Desiderius Erasmus, who lived between 1466 and 1536, was a Dutch philosopher who wrote a very influential book called In Praise of Folly. Unlike Francis Bacon, Erasmus argued to be happy, naivety, and ignorance are far more important than knowing. For him, the purpose of life is not to gain power, but to be content. He was writing at a time when Europe was waking up to have a renaissance, a resurgence in scientific and rational pursuit, which went against the teachings of the church to have faith in God. Erasmus, a Christian himself, while criticizing the corruption in the Catholic Church, argued that to be happy, a little faith and ignorance were vitally important. His philosophy was taken up by fiction writers such as Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, and later the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky. The goal of life is not to know everything, but to lead a simple life. Knowledge or power doesn't make you happy, but simplicity and folly do. It's the old adage that ignorance is bliss, which goes completely counter to the age of the Enlightenment and rationality. So Erasmus said that being an idiot was the surest way to be happy. Michel de Montaigne, who lived between 1533 and 1592, was a French philosopher who had a very curious childhood. Although born into a wealthy family, he spent his first 3 years of childhood in the house of a peasant, so he could learn the life of the poor. This must have had a profound influence on him later in life. If Erasmus said folly was a good medicine for happiness, Montaigne argued that to be happy, one should have a simple life. Instead of seeking the company of many people, one should try to live a more solitary life, because society can corrupt you, either morally or intellectually. In today's social media world of chasing likes and online attention and validation, his message resonates with a lot of people. We always try to seek the validation of our peers like some addictive drug to an extent that we are never satisfied. Montaigne says to have a peaceful life, don't chase other people's approval or glory or fame, which makes us pretentious and fake most of the time. He argued that attention seekers are not original thinkers, but rather suffers from herd mentality or tribalism, which in the heat of the crowd or moment turns us into mobs. We commit horrendous crimes and only later realize how stupid it was. To prevent becoming a mob, Montaigne argued once you disentangle yourself from the group, crowd, or mobs, you develop a clarity of mind or inner tranquility. It's not only good for your happiness, but it's also good for your intellectual and moral integrity, because solitude allows you to develop yourself. To have a lasting name, writers and artists should not be bogged down to social, political, and tribal issues of the day. Montaigne's idea of solitude also inspired Friedrich Nietzsche, who was extremely critical of the masses or mobs or tribal thinking. I'll discuss Nietzsche later on. As modernity made mass education the norm and the crowded city's habitat for the majority of people, life's meaning became even more acute for the modern man. Knowledge of the world wasn't enough to have a meaningful life. We needed something else. Martin Heidegger, who lived between 1889 and 1976, was a German philosopher who turned the lens onto himself. Francis Bacon, like Aristotle, was interested in knowing the outside world, but Heidegger, like Diogenes of Sinope, wanted to know the human being itself. In his famous book, Being in Time, instead of asking what human being is, he asked how it is like to be human. What is that experience like? Why? The simple answer is that we are scientists who happen to be also the subject of science. When you study animals, we are outsiders. But when we study human beings, we are insiders. Heidegger didn't want to have an abstract answer. Instead, he wanted to have a concrete answer to the question of being, which is incidentally the root of the word ontology in Greek. So what is his answer? Heidegger measured life as a finite phenomena, starting at birth and ending in death. Just a line that has a beginning and an end. Now, unlike other animals, we know death. We even anticipate it. The knowledge of death makes us anxious and fearful, so to cope, we tend to not think about it on a daily basis. It's either a coping mechanism or simply we do not have time to think about it every day, as we are busy with work and life. So we are the being who is aware of death, but we also try not to think about it. That's precisely Heidegger's answer. Human beings, or being in general, is to be aware of death. Instead of making us anxious or depressed, he thinks it empowers us. This knowledge of death gives our life authenticity and meaning. So if Bacon said knowledge of the world empowers us to better our life physically, Heidegger says the knowledge of death gives our life meaning and empowers us to live fully and authentically. Bertrand Russell, who lived between 1872 and 1970, was a British philosopher who was deeply steeped in the logical and mathematical side of philosophy, just like Ludwig Wittgenstein, whom he influenced. He used a logical and rational approach to argue that to be happy, one should work less. You could say he is responding to Marx, who argued that workers are exploited by the rich. But he's also responding to the Northern European work ethics, which states that work is morally good in itself. Therefore, this morality, according to some, was responsible for the modern capitalism. Russell, however, argued that seeing work as a morally good thing was not only irrational, but it also made a few people very rich while the majority very unhappy. Why? Because not all kinds of work are the same. Some are good and some are not good. Some are meaningful and some are not. To bundle all as a good thing is not logical. He concluded that working less increases human happiness. So instead of working yourself to death, you should enjoy life more. Do other activities. Today, a lot of people are so busy working long hours that they lose sight of their well-being and happiness. This is especially true for men because we are so drawn to numbers, just like Bertrand Russell was. We watch growth graphs and become obsessed with it. We work one day and then extrapolate that to a week, a month, and then a year. So if we work this many days, we will have this much money, or as a result, we'll lose sight of the fact that life is meant to be lived, not worked to death. So Russell argued that to be happy, work less. He lived to be 90 years old. Michel Foucault, who lived between 1926 and 1984, was a French philosopher. Unlike Bacon and Heidegger, he saw knowledge as a cynical tool of repression. Foucault looked at modernity through the lens of Nietzsche, saying that modern rationality wasn't liberating humans, but creating a more robust chain to control us. He famously studied the prison system and how prisons are designed to control us, either directly through imprisonment or indirectly through the fear of it. He argued that those who have access to science and knowledge use it to discipline the rest of us, through the education system as well as the legal system. Foucault argued that knowledge is a tool, science is a tool, rationality is a tool, but mostly for the powerful elite because they have access to all of them, while the majority of us are subjects. Michel Foucault was also inspired by Immanuel Kant, whose epistemological revolution argued that our knowledge of reality is not totally objective, but rather we see the world the way we see because we impose our own mental structure on the world. Foucault even argued that man or mankind itself is a recent invention. So to sum up, on the knowledge side, Francis Bacon understood that our knowledge of the world could empower us to better our lives. Heidegger argued that our knowledge of death can give our life more meaning and authenticity. Foucault, however, said everything is invented, there is nothing solid to understand. Knowledge is just a tool for power to manipulate nature and other humans. So to sum up, on the happiness side, Erasmus argued that folly, ignorance, or naivety is a good thing to have to lead a happier life. We have all seen children. When we grow older, we lose that naivety and become a bit more miserable. Montaigne argued that don't follow the crowd, instead seek some solitude to cultivate your own inner peace. Don't seek validation from others like a drug addict. The higher you go, the more you seek to get high and higher. No mountain is high enough. So listen to Montaigne because he came down the mountain to settle in a hut. Even his name means Montaigne, so climb yourself and your ego, not other people's validations. Bertrand Russell argued that work is not morally good or bad thing, so we should prioritize happiness over work. Work to live or live to work. I should really listen to this, but I want to have more subscribers. Montaigne, help. So knowledge can make your physical life better or make you more successful financially or boost your social standing, but it might decrease your overall happiness. Knowing things also makes us human very cynical about the world, just like Foucault said that all knowledge is power and all authorities want to suppress you. Naivety, on the other hand, might make your physical life harder as you don't have everything figured out, but it can also lead you to a more long-lasting happiness as you trust other people and rely on other people, which brings a level of sincerity in yourself and those around you. So knowledge makes you successful, but it could also make you cynical. While ignorance hinders your success, it could also lead to a more blissful life. What do you think? Next, I'll discuss the battle between rationalists and empiricists, leading to Immanuel Kant's great breakthrough in philosophical knowledge.